Hi everyone, Paul Balachik of Aradani Studios again for part 3 of our Tron Disc mod. This is the soldering and the wiring for the Identity Disc. So where we left off at part 2, I've just come back upstairs with my 12-volt battery holders, which I have grinded the sides of to make them a little bit more narrow, so that way they'll fit inside the battery compartment. Right now I'm going to take the two of them and I'm going to lay them side by side and figure out which alignment provides the best fit of the two together. Because you grind it, you might find that one is slightly askew, so when you hold them side by side they might not be as flush as you would like. Once you figure out which way you're going to glue them, just take a little bit of super glue. I'm using Loctite super glue gel. I find the gel gives you a lot better control than any of the super glue liquid. And just hold them together and make sure they're glued on really nicely. I'm going to fade away here because there's no reason to have a minute of me super gluing something together. So I'm taking my heavy duty switch that I got from Radio Shack, and in order to make it more shallow so you don't accidentally turn the disc on or off while you're playing with it for photos and whatnot, I have dremeled the tip of it off to make it a little bit more shallow. For the one that's going to power the LED strip, we're going to have to bend the metal lips that are on either end of it so that way it'll fit more snugly into the speaker alcove, the little tiny circular ring that used to hold the speaker of the original toy. So I'm just taking needle nose pliers and bending them a little bit and then pressing them down. So the LED switch is going to be inside the speaker alcove, and the EL wire switch is going to go into the switch, into the hole that used to hold the original switch for the toy itself. And as I said, I got both of these from Radio Shack, and the heavy duty ones tend to be the way to go. They feel very solid. I've tested them now in person. So we're ready to start connecting all of our wiring components for the LED strip. We've got our double 12-volt battery holder that's wired in parallel. So the red end, the two red wires on one end, the black wires on the other end. We've got one of our switches, which has been slightly modified so it'll fit into the speaker alcove. You're also going to need some extra wire. This is wiring that I simply snipped off of the end of the power cord from the LED strip, and I'm just going to reuse the wire from that. You'll also notice I have now cut out the hole inside the speaker alcove. I used my Dremel, and I used a couple of various bits. I used a drill bit, and I drilled 2 holes into the casing. And then using a boring bit, I was able to grind through and open it up a bit. And then I used a keyhole bit to make it a little bit more square, moving it back and forth like that. And just cleaned it up a little bit so that way it's nice and smooth but also square, but the switch fits perfectly now. So you're going to want to mount the two 12-volt battery holders into the original battery component for the toy. Now it's very important when you're mounting it in this way to make sure that the battery compartment is closed so that when you glue it down, you know that when it's glued down, the battery component door will open and close correctly. As you start hot gluing down pieces, you want to make sure to keep the glue relatively flat. You don't want to become too thick so that way the two pieces of the disc don't close anymore. So when I'm ready to start soldering, I like to glue in the battery holders first and then solder that second. With the switches, I like to solder it first and then glue it down, just because of the size of the switch. It makes it a little bit easier to solder when it's not glued down already. So what I'm doing now is I'm using wire cutters. I'm cutting the battery holder wires to be shorter, and I'm also going to then strip about a ½ an inch off of each of those wires, so that way they're the right length for what I need and aren't too long. So I cut the wires to size, and then using a wire stripper I strip those down. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to take the 2 red wires and the 2 black wires, and I'm going to twist them together. Once I've twisted them together, I'm going to then take a separate piece of wire, and I'm going to solder those 3 wires into a Y shape, so that way that's how I ensure that they're running in parallel. Now, just because it's getting to be kind of difficult to see what I'm doing with my head in the way and the fact that the solder is so far away, I'm about to cut to a JPEG that I made showing a wiring diagram of how the batteries, the switches, and all of that stuff is soldered together. So it's about to go from being a live video feed to being a JPEG, and I hope it'll help clarify things. So hopefully with this diagram you'll be able to hit pause and be able to wire this up yourself. But as you see, you have the two 12-volt batteries running in parallel. The two red wires off of that are soldered together and to form a single wire, which is run to the center pole of your switch. You can then wire the either end of the switch to the power cord for the LED strip. It doesn't matter because they're double throw or double pole switches. The center one is power, and then either the left or the right turns things on or off. So you have the red wire running to your LED strip power cord, and then the black wire is then soldered. The neutral wire of your power strip is then soldered, and it is brought back over and soldered to the two negative wires on your battery holders. If there's any confusion about this diagram, please feel free to contact me, send me an email, or post up a comment because someone else might have a question about this diagram, and I'll gladly help out. So I'm in the process of finishing hot gluing down the wiring, so that way whenever I take my disc apart I don't have to worry about the wiring, having to stuff it back in and whatnot. So I finished hot gluing down all of the wires, and I'm about to remove the battery component and test to make sure that all of my solder joints are correct and that everything lights up like it should. I would recommend buying a 2-pack of 12-volt batteries. Always make sure, especially since you're running these in parallel, make sure that you always have 2 batteries that are brand new or have the same power in them. Don't just grab 2 random batteries and stick them in there. But so now we test it and we can see that it does indeed turn on just like we wanted it to. Like I said earlier, this is a green disc mod. I was going for a virus program, so it's a little bit odd. So the next step is our EL wire wiring and soldering. We need the inverter, our AAA battery holder, our switch that's going to go into the original switch slot from the toy. And again, we're going to cut to a diagram so that way it's a little bit easier to see. And what I'm doing now is I'm connecting the discs, aligning it as it should fit so I can see about where the EL wire quick connect ends, so I make sure that when I'm mounting the quick connect it goes to the right spot. So here we have a AA battery, twin battery holder. You can see the red wire we solder. That goes to the center pole of our switch, which again goes into the slot on the toy where the original switch powered on the toy. Again, since we have a double pole switch, either end of the switch is fine to solder to. Solder to one of those, and that runs to the red wire on your inverter. Pretty much at this point you don't have to worry about the quick connect. The quick connect is the nice thing about ordering all of your inverters and EL wire quick connect are already assembled. You don't have to worry about that end. So the negative wire of the inverter comes out and is soldered to a random piece of wire that you have, and that goes back to your double A battery holder. And pretty much like I said on the last one, if anything about this diagram is confusing, just please let me know. But at this point, once you have this setup inside of your disc, you can easily test it by just plugging in the EL wire and making sure that everything lights up. But it shouldn't be an issue. So now we're ready to test everything and put everything together. First thing to do is to mount the rubber outer ring back in place. We push that down. Then you connect the quick connect for the EL wire, and then just flip the disc over. Make sure any little bit of wiring that might not be hot glued down is inside the disc, and just line it up. I find it easiest to line it up on those 4 little tiny paint marks on the edges of the discs. Once it's lined up in place, you just put the 6 screws back in to the back side of the disc. Now this does mean the reason why we put the 12-volt batteries in the battery compartment is because the LED strip burns through batteries much quicker. So you only have to remove 1 screw to replace your 2 12-volt batteries. To replace the AAA batteries for the EL wire, you're going to have to remove these 6 screws and open up the entire disc. Unfortunately, there's just not enough room inside of the disc to be able to easily access that. But the EL wire burns through the battery so slowly that usually you'd only have to do that after about 24 hours of continuous EL wire use. So again, I'm just simply tightening them down, and as you notice, I'm always tightening across the disc. That's just an easy way to make sure that everything is aligned up and that everything is going to screw down snugly and securely. And right now I'm checking the inner ring to make sure that everything looks like it is tightened down snugly, and I'm going to test it. The outer ring works. Flip the switch for the EL wire. Where's the switch for the EL wire? There it is. And now everything glows. And so there you go. This is a fully modified Tron disc. I'm about to go turn off the lights just so you can see it a little bit more brightly. And so there you go. A 2-foot strip of a 2-foot LED strip on the outside, a 5mm EL wire on the C ring, and you have a much more movie accurate replica than the original toy. And that's it. Thanks for checking out part 3.